Dragon Ball Infinite World is a game intended to celebrate the Budokai series if the back of the case and the gameplay is any indication at least. I think it succeeds at this on many fronts, but the game has its own identity and its own mechanics and ideas, and I want to talk about it on its own terms. Let's get the elephant in the room out of the way first, the minigames. Many of the minigames have completely different mechanics, and some of them aren't even worth talking about because they're so simple. But the biggest addition to the minigames is the 3D platforming segments. Your movement and abilities are intentionally heavily restricted in the 3D platforming segments because it's set up like something of a speedrunning game. The goal is not only to get to the end in the least amount of time, but to get the most collectibles on your way there, and how high you score determines how much Zenny you get, which you can spend in the store to buy Z items for the main mechanics in the game. Now, if you're not interested in any of this bullshit, you can just zip through all the checkpoint markers straight to the goal and never worry about it again. But if you feel like being more generous, you'll probably notice that the 3D platforming segments actually have some nuance to them. The boost ability, which lets you dash in the air as many times as you like until the bar runs out, is an incredibly overpowered ability to have in a 3D platformer, which is why it's so heavily restricted. In order to maximize efficiency in what is already a minigame that encourages speedrunning, you're going to have to memorize where all the blue bottles of liquid are, so that way you can refill your energy on the way to the goal and never run out of boost the whole time. In addition to meticulously planning out how you go through the stage, you have to get used to the controls, which seem intentionally stiff. And the reason I think that's intentional is because the last thing this minigame would benefit from is something that felt wild or free. You may think that doesn't sound very much like Dragon Ball, but it does benefit the minigame's overall design. Pretty much everything about it encourages you to absolutely meticulously plan your route through. The stiff controls, the energy refills, the collectibles, the haphazard open-ended checkpoint placement, it all seems there, so that way you replay the mission as many times as possible and master it. And I'm reminded of a lot of retro games with slight nuances where you have to play the game many times over, but when you do, you can do some pretty impressive stuff. And if you want to dedicate the time to these minigames, that's the most you're going to get out of it, but at least that's fun, right? And if you don't feel like putting in the effort, at least the minigames are loose enough, unlike those retro games, that you can just blaze through it and get back to the fighting. Oh yeah, I suppose it's about time we talked about the fighting. So much like the Tenkaichi series, which I also really enjoy, Infinite World has a ton of mechanics in place to replicate the feeling of Dragon Ball Z battles. Teleportation, aura burning, quick dodges, pursuit attacks, all things that are incredibly fast and feel very flashy, but also have some nuance to them. Much like Tenkaichi and the later Raging Blast games, the plethora of options at your disposal can feel overwhelming, but after you get a good grasp of them, that feeling of being overwhelmed is instead replaced with a feeling of freedom. You have to make a lot of split-second decisions based on what exactly you think the AI will do, and it's much like using a really rapid flowchart if the opponent also had a flowchart and you kept smacking your flowcharts into each other. So while quick reflexes are important, do not be mistaken. In order to truly get the upper hand in a battle, you're not going to want to react, you're going to want to read them very thoroughly. And learning to read the artificial intelligence is perhaps the most interesting part of the fights in Infinite World. This is because the developers had the foresight to make sure that the artificial intelligence's strategy changed as the game progressed, instead of just giving them more health bars. And with a plethora of complex mechanics at your disposal, it's rather like cycling through them all until you find the one that the AI is the most weak to. But it never really stays the same before evolving with every couple of enemies, so while you may be able to easily cheese out some, you're going to have to switch up your strategy immensely for the next few. It rather feels like a mix of a puzzle game and a fighting game. You've got to find out which approach and which style of attack is the best to use against which opponent, but that's more like a vague outline because that's not all you're going to do the whole fight. And having so many different mechanics and options to choose from during battle with the AI's constant fluctuations and strategy means that the game doesn't get old. At least not until the artificial intelligence evolves to the point where it discovers the ultimate strategy of just using throws on you over and over. At which point the game kind of wears out its welcome, but until then it's a blast. I would recommend it to anyone who wants a really fast and furious fighting game and isn't afraid of a harsh learning curve.